what are the impacts from the UNCRPD, from Singapore ratifying the UNCRPD and where we are today, the journey. When I think about where Singapore is, or the disability is in Singapore, it is a long journey. It is one where we can comfortably say that there has been positive change over recent years. I think we've evolved faster and in a positive way than I would have imagined. But for me, it's always a priority to look at what is still left to do and where are we today, not give ourselves too much credit for the journey that we've had to get here. The reason why I say that is the journey and all these improvements that we've made to accessibility, access to employment, access to education, whilst those might be considered wins, the problem is that we still leave people behind. There are still people who feel like they are not getting equality or equity, that they aren't getting a fair chance at a good job, that not all the opportunities are available to them. And I don't think it's acceptable for us to give ourselves a pat on the back whilst that inequality still exists. So all credit to both government and to the members of our constituency, disabled people in Singapore who are fighting and trying hard to make change, but we should always be striving to push harder to do more. If I think about things that are front of mind that are important to me personally, and important to and the organization of the DPA, the Disabled People's Association, I'd like to talk about, I guess, two or three key things. Number one, employment. We still have a gap in fairness and equitability, in the diversity of choice. Most of the jobs that are available to and being taken up by people with disabilities are still very much the low-income jobs, the roles that I guess no one else wants, versus the ones that we as people with disabilities want and can do. And so I think we need to work harder at getting a diversity of choice in employment roles. I think we need to acknowledge that there is discrimination in the workplace, and something needs to be done about that. And we need to do a lot more work in the very simple and I guess practical steps of helping employers understand reasonable accommodation and making those reasonable accommodations in the workplace that will enable people with disabilities to take up jobs in anything that they want and can do, rather than the roles that employers think that we as disabled people should be doing. And what I would also say is, I think the government needs to step up in leading the way in civil service, being themselves equitable and fair employers in the civil service, and really meeting their targets in that space is something that I'd like to see. In education, certainly I am a big believer in mainstream education and integration into mainstream education. And I certainly personally have been a beneficiary of having had that opportunity in my time to have access to education in mainstream schools. And, I believe that fundamental, I guess, building block of good and fair employment and enabling people with disabilities to get the jobs that they want is foundationally set in setting ourselves up for access to education. Being able to get it, to have the opportunity to have a good education then gives you, I guess, all the preparation and your right to earn employment at the level that meets your aspiration as a person with a disability. For me, the gap, the biggest gap that we have, the work that we still need to do is in and around social change. We like to say or think that from a policy perspective in Singapore that we've aligned ourselves to a social model of disability, our understanding of disability and our describing disability from a social model. But I think my feeling, and I think the feeling of many of our constituents, is that we're very much still in the mindset of a medical model of disability. And the social model is really important because it becomes incumbent on society to remove the barriers. But it also is to extent maybe a little bit more critical to actually also say that one of our biggest barriers to better accessibility and for social integration of people with disabilities is actually society itself. The way we treat each other is more of a barrier than the physical. I think I always feel like you can spend money and change infrastructure, build more accessible buildings, make buses accessible, make trains accessible, that you can spend your way out of the problem. But changing the way human beings behave, how we as a society treat each other, how we prioritize, how we determine what is fair and what is equitable is a social behavior. And that's not something you buy your way out of. That takes a lot of time, a lot of education. And I think it starts in education. It starts in the integration of people with disabilities into mainstream education. And so in this, I think there is still, for me, a real need for a civil right of non-discrimination through legislation. It is something I fundamentally believe in. And if we can achieve a civil right of non-discrimination, that really unlocks our ability to close the gap to better accessibility and fairness, if you like, in employment and education. It is the way that we really close the gap on both of those pieces. And it'll start to change social behavior. As a person with disability whose early employment career started in the UK, and I've experienced the early days of civil rights and non-discrimination there, I've seen over the years the transformation it's made, both in the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, as well as social behavior. And whilst it's still not perfect, it's a darn sight better. In other things, I would say the way we get change, right? The way we change policy, the way we work with stakeholders, gain influence and kind of change the nature of government policy is through advocacy, is through ensuring that we are represented, that our voices are heard, whether it's in your place of employment, amongst your friends and colleagues, or in a more public setting as being an active participant in a social service agency, so be it. Whichever way you choose, all of those are avenues of advocacy that I'd like to see people participating in.